going to be reviewing parallel and perpendicular lines. So this should be something that you remember a little bit from Algebra 1. The slopes of parallel lines are, hopefully remember that they are equal. So if two lines have the same slope, they're going to be parallel. Then the slopes of perpendicular lines are opposite reciprocals. So for an example, if you have that your slope is 1/2, the opposite reciprocal of that would be -2/1, which is just -2. The opposite reciprocal of 5 would be, 5 is really 5/1, so its reciprocal is 1/5. The opposite reciprocal makes it negative. One more example. Let's say you have a slope of 4/3, -4/3. The opposite reciprocal of that slope would be, first I would flip the fraction to 3/4, and I would change its sign. So now it would be positive. So let's talk about this example here. So I'm trying to find the slopes of the lines that are parallel and perpendicular to these four lines that are given. The first thing you need to do is identify the slope of the line that you're given. So for this first example here, this equation is in y equals mx plus b form. Here the m is 5/2. So if I were going to think about a line that's parallel to this line, it would also have a slope of 5/2. If I were going to think about a line that's perpendicular to this line, first I would take the reciprocal, and then I would change its sign to make it negative. So the slope of a parallel line is equal, and the slope of a perpendicular line is opposite reciprocal from the original. Now let's go on to example 2. Now this line is not yet in y equals mx plus b form. I need to get the y alone in order to do that. So I have to divide everything by 3. So this equation now becomes y equals x/3, which is the same thing as 1/3 x, minus 6 divided by 3 is 2. Now the slope of this line is 1/3. The slope of a line parallel will also be 1/3. The slope of a line perpendicular is going to be the opposite reciprocal. The reciprocal of 1/3 is 3, and now I'm just going to make it negative, change the sign. Now let's move on to example 3. So this equation is also not in y equals mx plus b form. There are two ways that I could solve for the y. One way is to just add the y to both sides. Then I get the equation x equals y. This is in y equals mx plus b form. You may not recognize it because the y is second, but this is really the same thing as y equals x. So here the m is the number that's in front of the x. There's no number there, so it's assumed to be a 1. So now that I know that the slope is 1, the slope of a line that's parallel to it, but hopefully you realize now it's also just going to be 1. The slope of a line perpendicular to it is going to be the opposite reciprocal. The reciprocal of 1 is just 1. To make it the opposite reciprocal, I just change the sign. I add a negative. So now let's try one more example here. So this last equation is not in y equals mx plus b form. So I'm going to try to solve for the y. If you notice here, there's lots of fractions. I know that you guys don't like dealing with fractions, so you can just get rid of them by multiplying by the common denominator. Our common denominator here would be 4. So I'm just going to multiply everything by 4. So 4 times 1/2 is 2x. 4 times 1/4 y is just y. 1/4 of 4 is just 1. Then 4 times 1 is 4. That 4 has to go through to every piece of the equation. Now my equation is almost in y equals mx plus b form. I just have to subtract the 2x from both sides. So I get y equals negative 2x plus 4. Now I can see that my m is negative 2. So a line that's parallel to this line would have the same slope. It's going to be negative 2. A line perpendicular to this line would have the opposite reciprocal slope. The reciprocal of 2 is 1/2. And now because this was negative, I'm going to change my sign and make my perpendicular line positive. So the slope of the perpendicular line is just going to be 1/2. Oops, sorry about that. So now let's move on to trying to figure out whether or not these two lines are parallel to each other, perpendicular to each other, or neither. So the first step we want to do is identify the slope of each line. For our first line here, the slope is clear because it's in y equals mx plus b form. So hopefully you realize that our slope is 3. Now let's try to do it with our second equation. This is not in y equals mx plus b form, so we have to get it into that form. The first thing we're going to do is subtract the 9x. I get negative 3y equals negative 9x plus 6. And then I'm going to divide everything by negative 3. So I end up with y equals 3x minus 2. Now here, the slope of this line is just 3, which was the same as this line. Therefore, you can conclude that the lines are parallel. Now we're going to just try an example where we're going to write the equation of a line that's parallel to a line that we already have given here. And it's going to go through the point 6, 1. So everything that we've been dealing with so far has either given you 2 points or has already given you the slope. So you've had a way to figure out what the slope is. Here, our way to figure out what the slope is of our line is by using the equation that's given. So the idea here is that you want to create another line that's parallel to the line that they gave you. So if the two lines are parallel, then they're going to have the same slope. The slope of this line we have to figure out by getting it into y equals mx plus b form. So in order to do that, the first thing that we need to do is to subtract the 3x from both sides. So I get negative 5y equals negative 3x plus 10. Now I'm just going to divide both sides by negative 5. And I end up with y equals a negative divided by a negative is a positive. 10 divided by negative 5 is negative 2. So the whole reason for doing that was just so that I could figure out what my slope was of this line that was given. I know that my slope of this line is 3/5. Now the question asks me to write the equation of a new line that's parallel to this line. If the two lines are parallel, the new line's slope must also be the same. So now it's just like some of the problems from last night that we tried. So our slope was m equals 3/5, and now I know that my point is 6, 1. So at this point, you should just go ahead and write the equation in point-slope form. Hopefully you remember that point-slope form is y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. So the x1 and the y1 represent a point that's given, and the m represents the slope, which you found by figuring out what the slope was of the line that they told you about. So I have y minus my y value, which is 1, equals m, my slope, times x minus the x value that's given, or 6. So now we're completed, and we've figured out the equation of a line that's parallel to the line that they told you, and that goes through the point that they wanted it to go through. Now let's try that same process, except now instead of writing the equation of a line that's parallel to, we're going to try to write the equation of a line that's perpendicular to another line. So here, my equation is 3x equals 4x. I'm sorry, 3y equals 4x. So now I just want to figure out, I don't know why that keeps happening, what the slope of this line that they gave you was. This way I could figure out the slope of a line that's perpendicular to it. So I just have to solve this equation for y. In order to do that, I'm just going to divide both sides by 3. And I get y equals 4/3 x. Now the slope of this line is 4/3, but I want the slope of a line to be perpendicular to this line. So I'm going to take this slope and take the opposite reciprocal of it. So I'm going to change its sign, and I'm going to flip it. So now I know that I want my slope to be -3/4. So I've gotten what my slope is. They told me what the point should be. So now all I'm going to do is put it into y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1, or point slope form. So y minus my y value is 0 equals -3/4 my slope times x minus 2, my other x value. So now you can simplify this. You don't have to write y minus 0. You can just write y equals -3/4 x minus 2. If the problem had told you to take this and translate it into slope-intercept form or standard form, you could do that once you got into this format. So this is our answer. We've written a line that was perpendicular to the original line that they gave you that went through the point that they wanted it to go through. Now let's just try one more example. So let's try to write the equation of a line that's parallel to this line, x equals 9, and that goes to the point 8, -2. So just to refresh your memory about what this line looks like, there's only one variable in it. It doesn't have two variables. So you know it's either going to be vertical or horizontal. An x equals line is a vertical line. It contains all the points where the x value is 9. One more. So now the vertical line through 9 on the x-axis. So I want to draw a line that's parallel to this line that goes through the point 8, -2. So if I go to 8, -2, my line would have to be parallel, would look like that. If it's parallel to a vertical line, it must also be a vertical line. All vertical lines have the equation x equals some number. So I just have to figure out what that number should be. Well, my line goes through 8 on the x-axis, so this answer is just x equals 8. A lot of times kids try to make questions about horizontal and vertical lines more difficult than they are. This is really an easy one. It goes through the 8, x equals 8. You're done. Now the next portion says, let's make a line that's perpendicular to it that goes through that same point, that 8, -2. Well, if you want to be perpendicular to a vertical line, you have to be horizontal. So now all horizontal lines are y equals some number equation. We just have to figure out what that number is. If you look at your line, it goes through -2 on the y-axis. Therefore, the equation must be y equals -2. So these numbers, if you look, are the same numbers from the point that was given. So we'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow and do some more examples. But don't forget to answer the questions when you're done watching the video. Thank you.